Welcome back to the Watch List. I'm Nicole Petalides. Thanks for being with us. It was a record-setting day, but we've pulled back some. Peter Tran is with us, Chief Information Security Officer with Infocyte. Peter, thanks for being with us. I know we're taking a look here at these Chinese stocks that are under some pressure, right, after this cybersecurity investigation on Didi Global in particular. And as of now, we've seen the stock dropping below last week's IPO price, and it's spooking folks a little bit. How spooked should they be?
Well, you have to really look at the investing environment for U.S. shareholders in particular. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison when it comes to this environment. You know, there's over 244 Chinese companies listed on U.S. Trading platforms, either by ADR or direct listing. And so for Didi, you have to remember, China in particular has this optic, the lens of protecting core state, their core state national security, meaning Didi itself has a lot of PII, or personal identifying information, coming through their 550 million users. And they're very careful, the Chinese government is very careful not to have that data travel overseas or out of their overall control. So this isn't necessarily the sky is falling for Didi. I mean, you have to look at the fundamentals of the company, and you have to look at China itself as far as its regulation. So lessons learned, if you look at what happened with Jack Ma, right? You know, China's very capitalistic, very entrepreneurial, but with very heavy guardrails around it. You get a little too loose and they kind of bring you back into the fray, right? Jack Ma got very quiet, people wondering what happened to Jack Ma. In this case, you have an aggregate new economy platform that poses a potential core China national security risk. So you have to keep that in mind.
Right, and so as we look at this, what about the other names that are going down along with it, right? So I understand and I respect what you're saying about the personal information of all these folks, right? You said over 550 million users of Didi, a lot of personal information there. That being said, what about some of the other names? Not only Didi, but Baba, JD, Tencent. They're all dropping along with this on this cybersecurity crackdown. Is this a bigger story, or do you think it's more of a Didi story?
I think it's a cascading effect. When you look at what the Chinese government can do, the Cyberspace Administration of China, or CAC, has a sweeping broad authority to enforce very quickly, unlike other countries. And you look at the U.S. takes a process. With China, the fear is then with a Didi, you have Tencent, Alibaba, others that can have the same type of crackdown. And what happens is you limit user base, and therefore, margins and the business model gets affected. So it's real from an investor standpoint, but Didi is an example. Really is one case. You look at Full Truck Alliance, which is the other. You look at Zhao Peng. You look at Kanzhun, which all three, by the way, are ADR, which can get a little foggy, right, from a transparency standpoint. And if you look at what happened last year with Luckin Coffee and the transparency around reporting of revenues, investors shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? I mean, the fundamentals become even more important, right? The due diligence around there. There are great business models overseas. There are great companies that are in China that are capitalizing on the new economy, and these platforms that aggregate, analyze, and store data. And this is, again, I want to emphasize, it's not a panic situation, but it is a caution red flag, because the ability for the Chinese regulators and governments to have that sweeping ability very quickly to just literally say, you know what, we're taking you down, and until you comply with our core state data privacy and security requirements.
Yeah. You know, and as we look at some of the EV makers, NIO, XPeng, Li Auto, what about those?
Oh, so XPeng, bless you. If you look at Tesla going into their market, right, as well, you can look at that kind of a dichotomy in the EV market. So NIO, again, same regulatory requirements there. It's no exception just because you're an online or you're manufacturing in the EV space. There is an interest with respect to the Chinese government to take care of their own economy as well. They want to have NIO be successful and Xpeng be successful. And Tesla entering the market is a validation of their market, but at the same time, they're going to be very cautious to balance that. Remember, from a cybersecurity perspective, the U.S. for over two decades has had that cybersecurity, geoeconomic, geopolitical tension. So you can't forget that as well with the interest that the Chinese government has in their own economic viability for leverage purposes.
So tell me, what's the final takeaway? Your best friend is a native New Yorker who wants to make some money. Should they put some capital to work in Chinese stocks? You mentioned over 240 names, including ADRs and stuff. There are a lot of people who love to invest in the Chinese economy and the ideas and excitement of China. And there are those who just would not invest any capital because they're just too afraid what the government may or may not do. What would you say?
I would say flip it on its head and think about it. If this was a Didi here in the U.S., owned and operated in the U.S., and then traded on the U.S., would they feel the same way? That being, you have home court advantage. And the fact is, there's 550 million users. They're growing. I mean, China's market itself in the ride-hailing world, and even the truck hailing, the Uber of trucks with the Full Truck Alliance, is a new economy, is a growth area, right? Hyper growth. The PEs there are amazing. So you kind of have to look at it that way. So my advice would say, look, fundamentals are important. Look at the space, flip it on its head and say, would I still be excited here? Now, you have to spend a little more time with due diligence with ADRs in particular when you're looking at those markets, but look at it in that respect. Now, if the answer still is, I'm not that excited anymore, the only reason why is it's a momentum. Everybody was getting into the latest craze of Didi, then you have to think twice and reevaluate your approach to those investments.
Peter, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking a closer look at what is a #1 story today, and particularly for those folks who got involved with Didi last week with the IPO. Peter, thank you. Peter Tran, Chief Information Security Officer at Infocyte. Thanks. Still ahead, in the second half of our show, our own JJ Keenahan is standing by and will break down the very latest of the TDAmeritrade IMX data, proprietary data, where we find out what was bought, what was sold, which stocks were hot and which weren't. Or not. Don't miss that. And as we take a look here at some